Hey, do you sometimes struggle selecting the best images from your shoot? Selecting the keepers, the right photographs? I think that at least to an extent, everybody does. The thing is, choosing those photos isn't necessarily as straightforward as it seems. So, keep on watching. There is a lot to learn about picking just that right photo in this video.
Hey, I'm Mitchell. For the past decade, I've been living my dream, journeying around the world as a professional travel photographer. During this time, I've seen and I've learned a lot. And now I want to share the knowledge with you. Come along on the journey.
Here I am back in the darkness tonight in this horror movie-like ambience. It's just too noisy during the day, too many things happening. This is really the only time that I get some peace and quiet, so apologies for the weird setting, but this is the only way that I could get it done. Now, like I said, selecting photos from our own shoots, our own collections, it's something that everybody struggles with, at least to an extent. It's very difficult to be objective with our own work. I've struggled, I still do sometimes, but over the years I have developed some instincts, some ideas, skills for choosing the right photos for specific purposes. These have come from working with editors, from talking, interacting with photographer friends, and from being an editor myself for a website that I used to run. So today I want to share some of these ideas, some of the skills with you. Let's begin by having a look at the very first step that we all need to make. That is selecting photos after a shoot or after a couple of shoots. Basically, when you're bringing the photos from your memory card onto your computer or your hard drive. So this is what I do first. I use an app called Photo Mechanic. A quite heavily overpriced app, but I still haven't found anything as effective as this on the market. Looking through the images in pretty much any other app isn't quite as snappy as this. Making Lightroom catalogs or whatever kinds of catalogs is really time consuming. Most often you don't need to import all the images onto your hard drive. So what Photo Mechanic does is it allows you to very quickly look through all the photographs on a memory card and say, yes, no, this is a keeper, this is not a keeper. You can tag the selections with a color, like a definite yes, a maybe. It saves me a whole lot of time, and in that sense, maybe the price tag is justified. What you're actually looking at here are my final selects from a long day of shooting as I drove from the Colca Canyon to Puno. As you see, there are still many photos here. My approach is that I try to keep as many images as possible. I generally only delete the photographs which are definite no-nos. Like if a photograph is unnecessarily blurry, or if I'm making a portrait and the person's eyes are closed, or they have a really weird expression, or if I have too many virtually identical photos because I fired the camera off in continuous mode. I'll get rid of some of those. Other than that, as you can see, I still have a lot of relatively similar photographs after each time that I make my selection from the memory card. By the way, I talk about selecting photos after a shoot in much more depth. I explain things like what makes a good photo and a bad photo in my travel photography course. I mention it in all of my videos. Now, because of the global crisis that we're all in, it's currently on a massive discount, 70% off. There's a whole lot in this course, from capturing the moment to communicating a sense of story and mood to post-processing. You even get my raw files to practice on. Many people seem to be enjoying it during this time, learning, distracting themselves, and every one of you who gets it, you're providing me with some great support as well. I mentioned in the beginning that things aren't as straightforward as they seem when you're selecting photos. You have to ask yourself a very important question. What is the image for? Is it for Instagram? Is it for a photo story that you want to show to an editor? for a blog post? Is it a submission to a potential client, brand, and agency? That sort of stuff. The skill of choosing the right photos for the right purposes, I think, is very important. And here I'm going to cover some of those purposes. So if you're posting on Instagram, pretty much everybody does that. Photo story / blog. There are similarities there, and you'll see what I mean later on. And I'm going to cover the portfolio or a best of selection, because making that selection is also a great multi-purpose type of exercise. So firstly, for Instagram, the general criteria for me is that the image or the series of images can work as standalone images. I might post something that I shot very recently that I'm really excited about, that maybe I really like, to get people's reactions, thoughts, or it could be something that I think is good and worth sharing that I've dug up from my archives. If it's a small series, generally it's from a fairly recent shoot, still relatively fresh. In some cases, I post something that I think is a surefire hit. Sometimes I just have a feeling, other times I've shown the image earlier, maybe on Facebook, so I know for sure that it's going to get a good response. Maybe it'll get featured by a larger account, might get me some new followers, so every now and then I'll post photos like that. Usually I'm not going to post the kind of photo which is part of a story and doesn't work without the other photos in that story. So in general, the stuff I select for Instagram is meant to be eye-catching, sometimes more, sometimes less, and any image I post should work on its own. With Instagram, for me, the process is meant to be kind of fun. I still take it seriously, but it's fun. I want to see people's reactions to what I share. I experiment a little bit, and sometimes I post things to get more attention to my account. Now let's have a look at how to choose photos for a blog or a photo story. And I think it's related, because a blog, the way I look at it, is essentially a photo story. It could be on a relatively small topic, or what I've been doing more recently is posting series of photographs that belong to a certain theme during a period of time. For example, most recently it's been about going from the coastline, from the desert to the mountains, hanging around the mountains, then going back to the coast, then going out and chasing the carnival celebrations, and just being back in the mountains again. The idea behind this is exactly the same as with selecting images for a photo story submission to an editor, except I do an extra little thing with the submission that I'll mention in just a bit. So firstly, you pick a particular theme. For me, in these posts, the theme for most part has been the journey. There are spectacular landscapes, moments with my girls, the people that I encounter, but they're all joined by one common thread: our journey through Peru. Each blog post focuses on a particular part of the journey. So if you plan to make photo stories, blog posts like these are a great exercise. I found them to be very beneficial when I used to make my selections and send them off to editors. By doing this exercise, you're essentially developing a stronger feel for storytelling through photos. Now, when you're making these sorts of selections, it's very important that your focus is not only on the best and the strongest standalone images. In the case of a blog, you want the photos to work well together. What you also want is to avoid having very similar photographs. So you might have two photos which are very strong, but, for example, this one here I think is maybe stronger than this one. However, I think that this one works better with the rest of the images. That's why I ultimately chose it. And because the images are too similar, I'm not including them both. So that's something that you should keep in mind. Photos that work well together. No very similar images, and each image should move forward your theme, your idea, your story. Submitting photo stories to editors. when it comes to submitting to magazines, to photo editors, this is what I used to do. I'd have a smaller collection of, let's say, from 15 to, I don't know, maximum 30 images. All of them should be connected and they all should make sense within the story. As an example, I'm going to use these photos here from Tigray, Ethiopia. I shot them a while ago and they were published in a few different places. So this is the quick, short selection. My aim here is to grab the editor's attention. They get loads of submissions, a lot of crap. So I want to show the quality of the images right away and my ability to tell a story with a series of photographs. You can see that there's enough variety. The images move the story forward, so great. If the editor is interested, I give them the option of seeing the full collection of related photos. And here I am including all of the images that could be useful for the story. The number is much higher and there are similar photographs. Maybe some verticals, horizontals, just to give the editor more of a choice. I still try to only include the better images in this selection, but if there's something really crucial to illustrate and I didn't get a great frame, I'll be more lenient. So those additional photos are the difference between a selection for a blog post and preparing a selection for a submission to an editor. The main criteria, again, is that each image moves forward the main idea, the main theme, or the story. The last purpose is for a best of or a portfolio selection to maybe put on the front page of your website like I did here. In this case, you're selecting from all your photos over the years and you're cutting down the number to 10, 15. Learning to make these kinds of selections can be very useful if you're submitting to brands or to agencies. Basically, this is a very quick overview of your very best work, which also should represent you as a photographer. I find it very hard to make this selection, partly because some photographs hold a lot of value to us. And if you've been photographing for many years and have many photos to choose from, it only gets more difficult. I've just recently adjusted my selection a little bit, and now I feel that it better represents the sort of stuff that I do now. The reason that you want to keep the number of images low for this selection is that you want to grab the attention of whoever is looking at them. You want to wow them. You want to kind of hit them with impactful visuals. So on my front page, I want to captivate the viewer and to encourage them to explore my website a little bit more. Even if they don't do that, they get an idea of the caliber of work that I do, of what sorts of places I go to, stuff like that. I've made a selection from different areas of the world. Also, I photograph people, intimate portraits, people in different environments, and I like to create a sense of story in my photos. So these photographs, they're kind of representative of that. But also, I want to show that I don't only make photographs that are visually pleasing. I want to show you images that make you feel something, that communicate something. It's a tough balance because I do want to include some images that are visually pleasing and light-hearted, but also ones which are a bit more hard-hitting, that have a different type of impact. There's no completely right or wrong way to do this. I could have made, I don't know how many different versions of this selection, and they all could have worked in more or less the same way. It's worth experimenting and maybe getting feedback from somebody whose opinion you respect. The main thing here in your best of collection is to do the following things. Make a selection that represents what you do at this particular moment. It's what you want to be known for, and show the quality of your work. Quality should always win over quantity. If you feel like you want to include something that's just kinda good, no, stop right there. This might be the only collection that somebody sees of your work. So if you do include the weaker images, they will leave a lasting impression. So, for example, when I wanted to be a Panasonic Lumix ambassador, I submitted a selection of the best stuff that I had made with their cameras up to that point. An ad agency wanted me to photograph some portraits for a big project in Indonesia, but they wanted to see what I could do. So I sent them a selection of what I thought were the best portraits that I created in Indonesia. Now, sometimes a selection is particularly hard to make. So ask people who understand photography and what you're about. If the selection is for professional purposes, then it makes sense to find a professional or an experienced photographer's opinion. Instagram can also be a tool for market research of sorts. You can find out what resonates with the masses. If your audience is relatively large, like 10,000 followers or more, the results might be a hint as to what to include in your best of portfolio selection. Right now, we're really in the best time ever to get input from others from all around the world. Experience. This, at the end of the day, is the key to getting better at selecting photos. With experience, you develop certain instincts, certain skills, and when you listen to knowledgeable people, when you get their advice, over time, you start to arrive at certain common themes and common bits of advice. Certain photos might consistently emerge as being just right for photo stories, and others for your best of collections. As I said, over time you develop your own instincts and ideas of what works. I remember when I started, I came to photography more from this fine art perspective. I still remember very clearly when I was showing these photographs of the sulfur miners in Indonesia to my cynical Russian photojournalist friend, who I spoke about in the last video. He said, "What are you doing? Why are you including this?" I said, "Oh, because I like the catchlight in this guy's eye." His reply was, "Are you fucking serious? Are you making a pretty portrait? Or are you trying to tell a powerful story of these guys' struggle? Why don't you include something like this instead? Or like this, with emotion, pain?" So little things like that, it's very important to be aware of them. Again, it does depend on where those photographs will go. So, selecting photos is an important skill to learn. The only time you won't have to select your own photos is if you're working on high-end commercial projects or with an editor somewhere like the National Geographic. In those cases, they might just want to make the selection themselves, or they will work very closely with you. If you're looking to get into magazines, online publications, most publications, you're most likely going to be selecting the images yourself and then pitching them to those publications. And with Instagram, most likely you're going to be selecting and posting the images yourself. Well, hopefully this video has been useful. As I keep saying, selecting from our own photographs is a challenge. It's unlikely that any photographer on their own has it 100% figured out. We do all need help sometimes. I know that I certainly do, but I have developed certain instincts, certain ideas, and I think I've managed to do quite okay over the years. The thoughts, the ideas in this video, I think that they make for some pretty solid guidelines for making selections in relation to your own work. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Why don't you subscribe, hit the bell to stay updated, watch some of my past videos, and I'll see you later.